Dear friends, good evening and welcome. On behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago, we are very pleased today to welcome Dr. Reverend Beth Johnson as our guest speaker. Reverend Beth Johnson is the minister of the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale, Illinois. Before that, she served as the minister of Palomar UU Fellowship in Vista, California for over 18 years and as a chemical dependency counselor in Orange County, California for 20 years. Dr. Johnson received her Master of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry degrees from Claremont School of Theology, emphasizing ecofeminist process philosophy. Dr. Johnson identifies as interspiritual, drawing from multiple mystical traditions. She also works on intersectional justice issues, serves on the board of the Unitarian Universalist Advocacy Network of Illinois, and enjoys singing with Songs for Liberation. Dr. Johnson is committed to sacred activism, linking spirituality and social change. In this momentous time, she encourages practices that foster fierce compassion, resilience, and radical love, leading to personal and systemic transformational change. To that end, she conducts workshops and retreats for faith leaders, faith communities, and activists. Today, Dr. Johnson will speak on the topic, Love at the Center, Living Unitarian Universalist Values in the World. There will be time for question and answer at the end of her talk, and so have your questions ready. And on that note, please join me in welcoming Dr. Reverend Beth Johnson.
There you go. I can see you better now. It's good to be with you. Thank you, Swamiji, for having me again, and Shravani for your wonderful welcome and all that you do, and Chris and everyone who welcomed me. It is good to be with you today. I'm going to move this out a little bit. I tend to move around when I speak, so hopefully I'm not going to fall off this as I decide I might need to walk around. As we begin, and thank you for the beautiful introduction, what I'd like to do is invite you to take a breath with me and to just arrive. As we consider love at the center of Unitarian Universalism, but beloved, love is at the center of all. So just take a breath and arrive from the various parts of your day, the various parts of our lives, and even the various parts of ourselves. And as you breathe, just feel your body on the chair, the bench. And remember that when we breathe in, we're breathing in oxygen molecules that have been at one time or another in the lungs of every breathing being. As we breathe in and out, the breath connects us to each and all here and now in this place and everywhere. And take another breath, and with the exhale, remember that the exhale makes us ancestors for those who will come. And it is in this breath that we find spirit, that we find the holy, that we find God, Pneuma, Rucha. Quoting the Reverend Dr. Sophia Bettencourt, president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Again, it is good to be with you on this beautiful summer day. It's summer now, even though we haven't hit June 21st. And yet we come because we know the importance of being in community. Today, what I'm going to do is I want to talk to you about the history of Unitarianism, Universalism, and Unitarian Universalism, drawing the thread of love that flows through this denomination and the many threads that brought it together. Unitarian Universalism is a values-based faith. We emerged out of liberal Christianity, but grew to be broadly inclusive theologically. So recognize many paths to the one, as you would say. Unitarianism and Universalism were heresies before they were denominational distinctions. Unitarianism, the heresy was that God was one, as opposed to the Trinity, and Universalism, that a good God wouldn't damn God's people to hell. Now that doesn't sound too unusual for us here, maybe, but I want to put you back some centuries and imagine if that's what you understood God to be. The doctrine of the Trinity wasn't set until 325 when Constantine needed to unite his empire. And the notion of universal salvation goes back to the early church fathers, including Origen in 325 of the Common Era. As Christianity evolved for the Roman tradition, I'm not going to talk really about the Orthodox tradition today. We don't come from that. But it had its own split in the 1100s. But up until the Protestant Reformation, there was doctrine that was set by the Roman Church, and that's what people believed. At that time, the scriptures were only available in Latin. They weren't available for common people to read. And it wasn't until 1517 when Martin Luther nailed 95 theses, or 95 statements, on the door of the church in Wittenberg in Germany. Martin Luther didn't set out to create a Reformation. He simply set out to a Protestant Reformation. He just simply set out for reform for the church. But of course, we get the term Protestant from what? From protest. So he was protesting the misuse of power in the church, and he was just setting out ideas for reform. And so Unitarianism emerged out of that context. Now remember, it was always a thread, but people weren't necessarily, thinking about it. It hadn't been doctrine, of course, the doctrine of the Trinity. So Unitarianism emerged in the 16th century, mostly centered particularly in Poland, Lithuania, Transylvania. It emphasized, as I said, the unity of God, rejecting the Trinity, and also questioning other doctrines that came to be after the Protestant Reformation. There were different sects that emerged for Protestant theology. And I'm getting to love, because it's all about love when you think about the movements that occurred. There was a doctrine that is called predestination. It's a Christian doctrine, and it states that before time, God chose certain people to experience eternal salvation and others to be damned to hell. Now, I want you to imagine, if you can, what that might be like, to be thinking that this was your fate. Now, of course, you had to act as if you were, and the other doctrine was the doctrine of original sin, that people are inherently flawed or sinful. Now, the Unitarians come along with what we call the radical Reformation groups that shared a commitment to individual conscience and freedom of belief, questioning traditional religious authority, and reforming both the church and society. There was an emphasis on reason and scripture. Early Unitarians were influenced by the Renaissance humanism, emphasizing a rational interpretation of the Bible as religious truth. The Unitarians were persecuted until, you have to remember that at this time in Europe, if you could wake up, you could go to bed as a Roman Catholic and you could wake up as some version of Protestantism. Not quite like that, but it just depended on who was in power at the time, what kings were. King John Sigismund, the first and only Unitarian king, was the first to issue an edict of toleration, where he issued the edict that all religions would be tolerated. Now, that might not sound too innovative for us here today. Well, in this particular landscape, or the moment that we're in here in the United States, it should be refreshing to remind ourselves that all religions and all articulations of faith are worthy and valuable. They had the focus on the humanity of Jesus, and the views varied, but the early Unitarians viewed Jesus as a human being, perhaps with a unique relationship with God, rather than as equal to the Father. And this differed significantly from the prevailing view of Christ's divinity. When I spoke to you on Christmas Eve 2023, I talked about Jesus the man and Jesus the Christ. And you can see these threads coming through. Unitarians also rejected that doctrine of original sin and the idea that Jesus' death was a sacrificial atonement for human sins. They believed in the inherent potential and goodness of human beings, and again, promoting that religious tolerance. Now, while universalism wasn't a mainstream doctrine during the Reformation, it did emerge in the following centuries, particularly with radical Anabaptist circles, and later organized as religious movements of the Unitarians and the Universalism. So we have at this time in Europe a rich soil for innovation, for bringing out new ideas, and really these different sects, Calvinism, Presbyterianism. There's a variety of them, some of the Christian denominations, of Protestant denominations that you may know. And so Unitarianism really flourished in Europe and they were persecuted during the Nazi regime in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, along with the others, Jews, homosexuals. So the Unitarians had faced this persecution, and even early on when Unitarian thought was first promoted, the martyrs for our faith are Michael Servetus, who was burned at the stake for arguing against the Trinity. So there was a certain commitment to truth as it was understood and held that really allowed us to evolve into a faith that was understood that revelation is not sealed. That's a hallmark of liberal religion, is that revelation is not sealed. Universalism as a distinct denomination began in the 1700s in this country. The Universalist Church of America was founded in 1793. And while Universalist views had been present earlier, this marked its organizational development and its distinct identity as a denomination. Key figures were people who, now I want you to imagine, if you can put yourself back in this time, that what you think is that predestination idea, that you're inherently flawed and you don't know if you're going to hell. Can you imagine that? And now imagine that there's preachers who come riding in on their horses, holding a Bible and saying, no, God is love. A good God would not damn God's people to hell. God is love, and it matters what we do here on this earth. So you can imagine that all souls will be saved. These early advocates helped spread these ideas. We called them, circuit riders, circuit preachers. So this is a thread that came through. In fact, one of the early Universalist ministers is John Murray. He had left England, where Unitarianism and Universalism had flourished, and actually differed from the Unitarianism that we know today in Europe. European Unitarianism is decidedly, markedly Christian. And you're going to hear how these threads begin to change and how more views got to be enfolded in. So John Murray had lost his wife and his child, and he vowed he would not preach again. So he's on a ship, he's like done. He's on a ship coming to America, and he's on a ship called the Good Luck. It ends up hitting on some rocks and getting stuck. And a farmer named Tom Potter rescued him, helped him, brought him in. Hearing what John Murray had done previously, he said, he had a chapel that he built. And he said, I have been waiting for someone to come and preach these things that you say. John Murray said, no, I'm done. I'm done with that. I'm not going to do that. But the weather didn't change for the ship to be able to sail. And Thomas Potter said, you're not going to be ready to sail until you preach. So he preached, and he preached the gospel of God's unending, inestimable love. He was able to set sail, and that's one of the stories about how Universalism wove itself into particularly the culture in the United States. Now, for the factors that go into the growth of Unitarianism and Universalism is there was definitely influence of Enlightenment thought, the intellectual currents of the day, the emphasis on reason and experience. There was a Quaker influence, our dear friends, the Quakers, who had that atmosphere in Pennsylvania, and they were receptive to Universalism. It's the rise of these, what we call the dissenting movements, right? Because this is a dissent, right? That rises up. And it's just part of that, because I want you to picture that you're in the United States at this time. And there's this fomenting of different ideas. Like newspaper articles, newspapers carried debates, theological debates. So it was a rich time. There was obviously, you can imagine, a wider appeal for people to be able to hear this message. Now, Unitarianism, because remember, we're two threads now. We're still not Unitarian Universalism. That's going to be, I think a couple of centuries before that happens. We heard about how it developed in Europe and how in Europe it has retained its Christian identity. So the churches in Europe, and if you go to a Unitarian church in Europe, you're going to go to a church that's Christian. We'll get to how it looks when you go to Unitarian Universalist churches in the U.S. now. The origins of Unitarianism developed through the movement of the congregational churches, and this is primarily in Boston. This is in New England, primarily Boston, where this belief, as I said, of the Trinity and human depravity was challenged. There was the influences of English Unitarianism. There was the influence of rationalism, the Enlightenment, and Transcendentalism. So the American Unitarian Association was formed in 1825. Now, at that time, they weren't really looking to cause a lot of trouble. They just wanted to be able to exchange pulpits with other ministers and to be able to hold their beliefs. Well, it turns out that this thought, this idea, this Unitarian thought, wasn't quite amenable to the congregational churches in Boston at the time. And so William Ellery Channing preached a sermon called Unitarian Christianity, basically embracing that and setting the American Unitarian Association as an entity and as a denomination. Now, the hallmark, as I said, of liberal religion, which both of these strains are, they're Christian and liberal at the time, is that, as I said, revelation is not sealed, and that there is a commitment that one has a a commitment to bettering society. And so we're going to hear about how some of that looked over the years for the Unitarians and for the Universalists. But the thing that happens next is the rise of transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is a school of thought that was promoted by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we know of as an author and a philosopher, but he was also a Unitarian minister until he left the ministry, ostensibly because he did not want to serve communion anymore. It didn't fit for him. But then we have other transcendentalists that stayed as Unitarian Universalists. There were no Universalists together yet. Now, remember that transcendentalism says what? That we could know God directly. The transcendentalists were informed by Eastern thought, they were informed by the Romantics, and they said that you could know God directly and directly through nature. So this was a bit of a controversy for the Unitarians, but what happened? The tent got bigger. One of my heroes is Theodore Parker, who was a Unitarian minister and a transcendentalist. He wrote an essay called The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. Now, one of the things that happens at this time is the influx and the rise of biblical scholarship, where people learned how the scriptures were actually written. The scriptures, the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, written at different times by different people. And so because Revelation is not sealed, people are taking in these ideas. And they're saying, okay, we can learn from multiple things. And so they did. And so it was that folks began to just have these rich experiences in church and in their writings. And as I said, the tent got bigger. Now, Unitarianism and Universalism kind of grew up together, but in different ways. Unitarians, again, Boston, New England, a more intellectual movement, and the Universalists, more rural and more based on, not just based, but also using reason and insights from the other world's religions, but also more experiential, experiencing God's love, because that's the saving message of universalism, is that God's love knows no borders. For Unitarians and Universalists, both understood their role not only to care for those in their immediate sphere, but also to care for all. So social work, abolition, so the end of slavery. And that brings me to Theodore Parker, who was an abolitionist, and he is really one of my heroes. They used to say, the story goes that he would write his sermons with his pistol on his desk because he was helping slaves get to freedom. Now, not because of that, but because of his other theological views, the Unitarian ministers invited him to disassociate with them. And he said no. And so when he said no, they didn't kick him out. The tent got bigger. This is just an example of how the tent of Unitarianism got bigger, and we'll see how the tent of Universalism got bigger. Now, so they're both drawn to helping society, doing justice work, abolition, as I said, the right to vote, and later civil rights. We'll get to that. Now, for both traditions, they drew from multiple sources. We remember, as our connection has brought us together, that Unitarians and Universalists were both present at the world's Parliament of the Religions in 1893, where Swamiji came and ended up speaking to people around the country, including, which I think some of you know, the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale on October 15th and October 22nd in 1893. So our connections go back. So what's happening in this rich religious landscape of the World Parliament of Religions is people are getting exposed to all of the world's religions. I will say that for the Christians who participated in the parliament, there was probably a little bit of Christian exceptionalism going on, but not for the Unitarians and not for the Universalists, who allowed themselves to be informed by these various traditions and threads. So for the Universalists, who still had a Christian identity, but they saw the universality of all religion. They saw the universality of love, and that's become the foundation of universalism. Unitarianism as well, drawing from the world's religions, drawing from understanding that the tent needs to be big. It reflects the fact that truth can be found in many places, and truth is one. I love that says many faith, as many faiths, so many paths. You'll see how that fits. Now, Unitarian Universalism is a worldwide movement. Unitarianism has had a significant impact and presence in India, particularly in the Khasi Hills region of northeast India. The movement in India began with Kishore Singh, who found Unitarian convictions through questioning and doubt, and he established the first church in Jawa Khasi Hills in 1887. It's a home now to a large, thriving group of Unitarian Universalists, often referred to as the Unitarian Union of Northeast India. His work was just foundational to this. The American Unitarianist, there's a lot of U's. The Universalist Church of America was very much supportive of what was happening in India at that time. And now the Unitarian Universalist Association has what we call the Holding India program that supports humanitarian and social justice work in India. The program works with various groups, including marginalized communities, women living in poverty, and indigenous tribes, and also collaboration with grassroots groups. The Brahma Samaj, which you know so well in your tradition, from where hence came Vivekananda, that founder was influenced by Unitarianism and the teachings of William Ellery Channing, who I mentioned. And he initially worked with Unitarian missionaries and founded the Calcutta Unitarian Society before establishing the Brahma Samaj. Now, while not directly derivative of Unitarianism, Brahma Samaj shares many of the commonalities with our faith, including the focus on one God, rejection of dogma, and our commitment to social justice. Unitarians and Universalists, I would say they flirted with each other for about 100 years. They shared pulpits with one another. Some ministers were duly ordained, and eventually they figured it might be time to merge. The youth groups merged in 1954, and the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America merged in May of 1961. We just had another anniversary. We did just pass the 200th anniversary of the American Unitarian Association. What bound us together was our openness to ongoing revelation and our commitment, basically, to love. Because for us, love is at the center. I'm going to go up. Love is at the center of our faith. If it hasn't been clear yet, that's what it was all about, is really bringing us to a place of understanding God's love, God's compassion, God's commitment to all of humanity and all of creation. As I mentioned, both faiths were committed to social justice, meaning putting love at the center. They were non-creedal, we're non-creedal, but we are a covenanted faith. A covenanted faith is one in which we agree to walk together in the ways of love. While we don't have a creed, we covenant to be together, to do the work of love in our congregations, in our lives, and in the wider world. For the Unitarians, the influence came also experienced the influence of humanism, where people said you could be religious without God. Imagine that. That was pretty radical to say, but the tent got bigger. After the merger, love has still been at the center for Unitarian Universalists. When the association was founded, they created 7 principles, or otherwise ways to, what are the principles that grounded us. In the 1980s, we developed 7 principles: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in all of our relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, respect for the interdependent web of all existence. We posited 6 sources of our faith: direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. The words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings, which teach us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. And finally, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions that celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rest of nature. These are beautiful sources, but the tent keeps getting bigger, beloved. We keep welcoming more. Reverend Kathleen Rollins wrote, "Throughout history, we've moved to the rhythms of mystery and wonder, prophecy and wisdom, teachings from ancient and modern sources, and nature herself. We're united in our broad, inclusive outlook, in our shared values. We are united in shared experience, our open and stirring worship services, religious education, rites of passage, our work for justice, our commitment to center the experience and the needs of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable, our dedication to living in a way that always centers love." Love is at the core. Love is at the foundation of Unitarian Universalism. Now, as we are called a living tradition, meaning it's actually those principles and sources that I shared with you are actually written in our bylaws, which may sound, I don't know, kind of geeky, but remember we have a democratic process. So those bylaws were to be explored and changed every 15 years. It took a few decades for that to happen. But just recently, our General Assembly in 2024 voted to replace the existing principles and sources that describe Unitarian Universalism through the shared values that we have, which are centered in love. And I'm going to share them with you now. And you'll be able to see how these values are written through not only our history, but also through those other 7 principles that we talked about. The values of interdependence. We honor the web of existence in all and acknowledge our place humbly in it. Pluralism. We say we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. Justice. We work to be a diverse, multicultural, beloved community where all feel welcome and can thrive. Transformation. We adapt to a changing world. That's exactly what we do. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. And equality, equity, we declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity and love. One of our theologians, the Reverend Dr. Sherry Prudhomme, reminds us of the centrality of love historically. I've talked about the great Universalist heresy. I've talked about, she writes that love is embedded in the very fabric of the universe. That is a strong piece of us. It is nurturing. It is inclusive. She writes, this love would not let go of anyone. Grounded in this love, we flourish. A mentor of mine said about love that there is a love that will not let us go, will not let us down, and will not let us off. In other words, we are held in love, and that's why we do the practices that we do. In Unitarian Universalism, one of our shared rituals is lighting a chalice, reminding us that we're held in community. The flaming chalice was developed by the Unitarian Service Committee during World War II to help people get through safety from danger in Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe. Love. That's a reminder. Every week that we light that chalice, it's a reminder of love. It's a reminder of our commitment to do all that we can to help people be safe and to know that they're valued. That is how we put love at the center. We do a flower communion service every year. It's one of our own unique rituals where each person brings a flower. They are blessed, and everyone takes a flower different than the one that they chose. That flower communion service was created by Norbert Čapek, who became a Unitarian minister and his congregation thrived in Czechoslovakia. And so when he was killed by the Gestapo, his love continued to spread, and that flower communion is a reminder of how we center love. We'll be doing that at my church in another week. We affirm, Dr. Prudhomme writes, the power of love to heal what is broken, to hold us together across the plurality of diverse religious practices and beliefs, to hold us when things fall apart, to grow our capacities, to guide us as we turn again and again in our families, in our communities, to side with love. Unitarian Universalists show up in public spaces with bright yellow t-shirts that say, we side with love. Ministers show up in our stoles that say, we side with love. That came to be when the president of the Unitarian Association at the time was in his office and got a phone call for an interview from a reporter who was asking how Unitarian Universalists felt about marriage equality. This is, of course, in the 90s. And this was in the early 2000s. And Dr. Sinkford said, we stand on the side of love. A composer was sitting in his office at that time, and he wrote a song called Standing on the Side of Love. Today, we sing it as answering the call of love. We have an organization in the UUA called Side with Love. And Side with Love helps us to live our love out loud in the world in so many ways. One, any disconnection from love, Dr. Prudhomme writes, disconnects humanity from the ability to think humanely, act humanely, and embrace their humanity. It's impossible to relate to and engage the humanity. It is then impossible to engage the humanity of others, if we are disconnected from our own humanity and from the love in which we're held, this train of thought, we then can recognize all that happens, the genocides, from the transatlantic slave movement to Auschwitz, to Namibia, Rwanda, the Congo, and now the genocide in Gaza. All of this is an affront to love. And all of this is what God or the holy calls us to live. We live our values when we reach inside to find the love within us and bring that out into the world. When we turn to each other in church, and we do a ritual in my church called Joys and Sorrows, where people share their joys and sorrows and put pebbles into a common bowl. For me, that common bowl, Steve, is love. I might not say it out loud every week. The common bowl filled with water is the fresh, refreshing waters of the Spirit and of love. And so in these days, we live our values of centering love in that way. We also live those values in our immediate community, preparing meals for the unhoused. We have an immigrant justice team. Immigration is one of the issues that the Unitarian Universalist Association provides us support for, supporting our migrant, immigrant, and asylum-seeking neighbors, because love says there's no borders. Love knows no borders. We are needed to put the work of love out into the world. When we say, as Unitarian Universalists, we assert that as a theological statement, assertion, but we also see it as a call to action. I'll end with a part of an essay and a poem that I wrote that will be featured in an upcoming book, We Pray Freedom, Liturgies and Rituals for the Freedom Church of the Poor. It was written when I joined hundreds of faith leaders and other faithful in action at the U.S.-Mexico border under the banner of Love Knows No Borders. I can't claim the originality of that. It was actually created by the American Friends Service Committee, who many Unitarian Universalists and the Poor People's Campaign joined at the border in order to respond to the growing militarization of the border and the injustices faced in migrant communities. That day, I reflected, love knows no borders. Just like the birds that fly overhead and the ocean that laps the shore, love knows no borders. As we walked the muddy path and onto the beach from Porterfield State Park, with each step, my mind was on the migrants who make an arduous and dangerous exodus to reach safety and asylum. As I knelt, inches away from armed border agents and concertina wire, my mind was on the refugees. This is in 2018, friends. My mind was on the refugees and on the soulless policies and the practices that disregard human dignity. In the world that I'm working for, people fleeing poverty and violence are welcomed with compassion and warmth and food and hospitality and freedom and love. And so I wrote, Love's Calling. Can you hear it? Love's calling all around. Love's calling from the depths of our souls. It emerges. Love's calling, stirring, luring, longing, leading hearts, beating for justice, beating for hope, hearts beating, pulsing through the bodies on the line. Love's calling me, you, us. Love's calling, beating hearts, bruised and worn out bodies, rising spirits. Love's calling from the streets, from the borders, from the margins. Love's calling, whispering, shouting, raging, praying. Love's calling all around. Love's calling for justice. Love's calling, igniting courage. Love's calling us on this journey where love knows no borders. And it takes us to the depths of our griefs, to the depths of our longing, to the depths of our souls. And love stirs in us with compassion and passion. Love rises into action. It flows through us and beyond us to our siblings in Exodus and everywhere, because love knows no borders. So it is love that called us there at that time and in that place. And I believe that this is the sacred purpose, to prepare our hearts and our minds and our bodies to be witnesses to the love that is at the center of everything, of this universe, of all the galaxies, of this beautiful planet. I think love throbs in the molten core of Mother Earth. Love is at the core of you, and you, and you, and you, and me, and everything. So, as I close, I invite us to take another breath and see, beloved, where do you feel love in you? Now, in your heart, in your face, in your hands, when you go to embrace your child or a loved one, in joy or in grief. Take one more breath, and let's bring love to our center. Thank you for letting me share. Thank you. And there's time for questions. So we've got 10 minutes for questions if anyone has questions. Yes? Okay, we're going to have a mic.
No, I just have two questions. Observations, basically. You don't have any, as part of your doctrine, any personal God or anything like that, right?
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah.
The question was, do Unitarian Universalists have a personal or an individual God?
Yeah.
The answer to that question is yes and no. Because we are a pluralistic faith, our congregations have people who identify as Christian, who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are Buddhist, who are Hindu. One of my dearest friends, Abhi Janamanchi, is a Hindu UU minister. You have people who understand themselves as humanist or earth-centered, or even atheist or agnostic. So Unitarian Universalism is non-creedal, so there isn't one doctrine. And here's the thing. Unitarian Universalism is a non-doctrinal faith that's named after two doctrines. There was some discussion about that when the association was formed, but both denominations wanted to keep their identity. So truly the answer is yes. Some people believe in a personal God. Some people believe in a higher power or the oneness of the divine. Some people believe that they see God. I think I could say this. What do you think, my Unitarian Universalist friends? I think I could say that most people see the holy in the rest of nature and other people. So, yep, the answer is yes and no.
Yeah. And also the other thing is that I assume that your love includes all beings, not just humans alone.
Can you repeat that?
No, I assume that your definition of love includes animals also, all beings.
My definition of love?
Yeah.
Yes, my personal definition of love includes the universe, all beings, all people. I for me personally, see, I can't speak for all Unitarian Universalists.
Yeah.
I can tell you these are our values, and I can tell you that myself, I understand myself as interspiritual, mystic, drawing from multiple traditions. You have, one of the people that I answer to, and that's the Lord Hanuman. So, but I personally draw from multiple traditions. I have a Buddhist practice, I chant kirtan, I walk on the earth like it's sacred.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You had mentioned about the transcendentalists when you were talking about the universalism, Emerson and Thoreau. So is there any of, they were essentially also known as thinkers and philosophers.
Yes.
So is there any philosophical dimension in the universalist movement?
Can you say it again?
Is there any philosophy or philosophical inspiration or aspect
Absolutely.
And where does it draw from?
Oh, multiple sources, right? I would say that for many, we could be understood as a philosophically theological denomination. I think I can say that pretty clearly, that it's deeply philosophically rooted because not everyone is going to articulate a particular theology. So, early on, of course, philosophically, it drew from the Enlightenment, right? And I would say that philosophically, now we draw from process philosophy, we draw from ecofeminism, we draw from multiple philosophical traditions. I'm sure we have Kantians among us, who draw from the more, mind-body split philosophical tradition. I will say that, even though we're working to mend that. But I would say, yeah, we're deeply philosophical. In fact, you'll find many of us are attuned that way. My own work was in process philosophy and ecofeminist philosophy, so.
Thank you so much for this very expanding, loving talk today. It was very energizing. And as I was reflecting on the idea of the tense growing through history, I wondered a little bit about how it might be as an individual within the congregation in terms of self-development, or what it might look like for guidance in such an expansive, inclusive body.
Well, it happens through a variety of ways, through preaching. So I will preach on multiple traditions. Every year I do a Celtic Wheel of the Year series so people can connect with their more nature-based. I did Diwali, we did a Buddhist service, but plus it's through just honoring people's, there's this tension between, sometimes people say about Unitarian Universalism, you can believe anything you want. No, you believe what you must. Because remember that other principle was a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So in our religious, for our youth, for our children and youth, the religious education, we expose them to a variety of world's religions. They go to different congregations, different churches, and they get to reflect on that. We talk to them, we nurture them in creating their own beliefs. We have a course called Building Your Own Theology, where people will explore that. And so there are congregations, there are some congregations that have a noted Christian identity, where they will say the Lord's Prayer every week. You've got some congregations that are more humanist in their centering. And there you will see very little ritual, and there'll be a lecture, more like a lecture kind of thing. I think one of the things that's happening, and I think you're getting on something really important, I think that in the culture that we're in right now, we have so many people who are called the nuns, and I don't mean religious nuns, spiritual but not religious. And people come wanting a spiritual community where they can be fed spiritually, where they can explore, but also, and this I think is the important innovation, if you will, with the tent getting bigger and us changing our bylaws to these values with love at the center. Because you can have a variety of individual beliefs, but it's how we act together. And I recently helped plan a conference, a theological conference. And, we came down to, exploring, is there, can there be one UU theology? And the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, who I quoted at the beginning, edited a book called Love at the Center, Unitarian Universalist Theologies. So we recognize that people are going to come from different places. But love gets a bad rap, right? Love is often seen as mere sentimentality, right? This is not that love. This is a radical love. It is the love, and it's a saving love, right? And so in the community, in our congregations, if you look at all of the world's traditions, including the humanist tradition, what is at the center but love? Articulations of Christianity currently, in some cases, notwithstanding, the prophet Jesus taught us to love one another, to welcome the stranger. And you find that in the teachings of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was about love. And wasn't Vivekananda about love and oneness? So does that answer your question? Did that get to it? Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you so much for welcoming me here. Swami Satyananda, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
This was a very excellent explanation. It's not the do's and don't list. Usually the religion means they will always give you that these are the things that you can do, these are the things you cannot do. But this is a faith which says anything you like you can do, but that should not harm anyone. That is the main way it says. And I was observing, she showed over here, in the center is the love, which is burning, and it may be pluralism and transformation, generosity, independence, equality, justice, all these 6 good, wonderful qualities, the human qualities, that may be there. And in the center, it should be love. So what we say from the Vedantic point of view, of course it is love, but it is ananda. Ananda means the happiness. Love is happiness. And that ananda, if it is there, then everything is there. So ananda is the source of creation. In the Vedanta, it will say that ananda, happiness, is a source of creation. And in Sanskrit, they will say, anandaiva khalu imani bhutani jayante. From the ananda, from the happiness, imani, these beings are born. Khalu, truly, which is the source, God. What is God? Ananda. So what we want, ananda, happiness, in every effort of our life. Now, this is a unique faith that developed, and wonderfully you have given the history also, then how it developed in the Europe and slowly it came to America. And now it is followed by anyone without changing your faith. So thank you very much, Dr. Beth, for coming over here. And she's a very good friend of ours. And you know, in their church, they are preserving a table and a chair that was used by Swami Vivekananda. So sometimes we go, when they are there, the church is open, and whenever the Swamis they come, we like to ask them to go and see that. They are preserving it, not that we are doing it. We are the follower of Swami Vivekananda, but they invited all over America, wherever he spoke in the church, that was Unitarian Church. And that shows that broadness. And always, any new thing, always they're eager to listen. And any new thing, they like to learn it, so that slowly you can grow. When we move, accepting everything, we grow. And when we close down, we are dead. Swami Vivekananda said, very wonderfully, expansion is life, contraction is death. We want to live, we want to expand, we want everyone to come over here and feel that is their home. This home of harmony that we created under the inspiration of Vivekananda's Ramakrishna, only for that. Thank you very much, thank you all of you for coming over here. It's a very, very bright sunny day. People are always like to go to enjoy outside, but still some of you have come. That's good. Thank you very much. Thank you. We will conclude by saying peace. Oh, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti 3 times. Shanti means peace. Om Shanti. 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 Harihi Om. We have a Mataji here. I'm sorry, I don't know the name, but it doesn't matter. Mataji. That means the symbol of mother. Mataji means mother. So that she is wearing the gerua, and that reminds us of that the great sacrifice. The color is a sacrifice. It is becoming fade over here. But you're very good, very good. Thank you. You're most welcome.